We're with Joe Kent and Ted Kefalas, Grassroots Institute. Gentlemen, thanks for being here.
Good morning, Rick. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, appreciate the time.
No, it's a pleasure. I appreciate the work Grassroots accomplishes on behalf of us. And let's start there. Joe,
Yeah, sure.
walk us through.
Well, someone has to read all of the bills at the legislature. Someone has to look at what lawmakers are doing and hold them accountable. And someone has to try to come up with some unique ideas to help spur business and our economy and lower the cost of living so people can afford to live here. And that's what the Grassroots Institute does. We've got a whole team of people that are working every day to try to make things much easier to understand and better Hawaii.
Ted, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's not just the state legislature, although, that's been the focus, obviously, for the past few months, but it's also looking at things like the city councils, the county councils throughout the state. We're looking at different state agencies, trying to make sure that what's happening there is transparent and is beneficial for Hawaii families, Hawaii businesses. So, a lot of these things happen and they're very complicated or they're hidden behind closed doors. And we really just want to bring light to those things and help people understand really what's happening in their government.
Like to set some little foundational, that is, how do we connect? How do we learn? How do we participate, Joe?
Well, you can find us on our email list at grassrootsinstitute.org, or you can go on Instagram, Grassroot Hawaii, and find us as well. So
Yeah, you have a substantial distribution, so...
Well, every time I open Instagram, it's your videos that I see, and you telling me what I need to know. So,
And
yeah.
we work together.
Yeah,
that's what
right.
I'm saying. Role responsibility, Ted, just so folks understand.
Yeah, so I work as our director of strategic campaigns, and essentially that's a fancy way of saying registered lobbyist. So a lot of times I'm down at the Capitol meeting with different lawmakers, again, at the state legislator level and then also at the county council level, and really just trying to have them understand some of the work that we're doing. Obviously we do a lot of reports and things like that, and we want to make sure that they don't just sit on a shelf and that they're actually utilized. So trying to draft legislation that's built upon those reports, and really just trying to implement the things that our great policy team is working on every day.
Yeah, that's phenomenal work. Couple of wins for Grassroots in that regard, Joe.
Well, this year, most of our wins have been defensive.
Right.
Sometimes I feel like we're a goalie playing soccer and there's like a million balls headed our way. But we did, stop or help to stop, at least make the argument to stop many of the tax hikes that were coming at us. And these were things like capital gains tax hikes, wealth taxes and conveyance taxes, and every tax you can think of was coming our way, and we helped to block it. So, yeah, that was a huge win.
Yeah, I mean, every major tax increase, for the most part, was killed, except for the income tax cut. I'm sure we're going to get into all the nitty-gritty of that here shortly, but, I mean, the default in Hawaii a lot of times is just increase taxes. When we need more money, increase taxes, rather than, trying to actually cut down a little bit and try to tighten your belt. I mean, Rick, when you or me have a problem with our house budget, we maybe don't go out to the 5-star restaurants. Right. We try to eat in. We try to actually save some money. But it seems like our legislature doesn't always do that. So, I mean, there were tax proposals on things like concert ticket sales and performing arts. I mean, there was additional car taxes and I mean, you name it, like Joe said, there was probably a tax proposed for it this year. So we're very glad that we were able to kill, like I said, most of those major proposals.
No, and that's what I mean, thanking you on behalf of folks, because without your efforts and perhaps even some partnerships, we would be experiencing something a bit more troubling. But I am going to cite, I believe it was in January of this year, where you had stated on Grassroots there's going to be a $1.8 billion impact because of a retreat by Governor Green on the 2024 tax cuts. So we were all watching patiently. Joe and I have chatted about it during the session. can you give us the before, and we're in, I call it the bottom of the ninth, because
Yeah.
Friday is sine die. Give us the before, and now give us the after.
Well, the before is the governor and all of the budget wonks were looking at the numbers and saw that over the next 5 years, they would be $1.8 billion short. And so their solution to this was to pause the income tax cuts that were that would have gradually been implemented year after year. Now, at the end of the legislature, we have a new bill, a new income tax bill, and what lawmakers have done is keep the tax cuts for the lower and middle ends, pause the income tax cut for the upper high ends, and actually increase taxes for the extremely high ends. And so, you get a cut on the bottom and you get a hike on the top. And the problem now, though, is no one actually knows what the numbers are. It's all up in the air. If you ask any lawmaker, any politician today, they've got different calculations. And really, even if they do have real calculations, nobody knows until we actually get to the future years. Because just because there's a tax cut doesn't mean that revenues will go down necessarily. There's so many things that could happen. The economy could fluctuate up or down a few points, and that has a huge impact on things. And so, in any case, I think the real pressure is the spending, as I keep saying. And the governor may need to get his veto pen out. In fact, that's a good idea anyways, to snip a little bit from the budget.
Ted?
Yeah, I think it's important to note, too, anytime you talk about cutting the budget, a lot of times people's alarm bells start going off and thinking, all of these people that are, poor and rely on the government are going to be left out in the streets, and all of these essential services are going to be gone. But there's a lot of bloat in the budget, a lot of areas that can be cut without necessarily hurting, the people that were intended to help. So I think that there's an opportunity, and this is really the right time to look at that. Because if we don't look at cutting during times when we need to, we're never going to do it. And so we're just going to continue to grow and grow and grow. And so even this year with the budget, and I don't know, kind of like Joe said, nobody's really gone in depth into the new CD1 version of the budget quite yet. But it's something where I don't think that there even is a decrease from last year. It's actually, I think, a few increases. So, when we talk about, we have a budget crisis and we need to pause the tax cuts on all of our Hawaii locals, again, what are we doing to actually look and trying to save those and actually cut some of the budget?
I think you've just touched upon what is top of mind with most people that pay even a modicum of attention. That is, what the hell are the numbers? Because they tend to shift. There's no real transparency in the disbursements, nor the individual agencies and or individual entities that are recipients, and that's going to lead into recovery, which we'll touch upon because that has received more. But let's start here. The biennial budget for the state of Hawaii in its present form is how much?
It's about $20 billion, and that's biennial budget, meaning for over the span of 2 years, is a $20 billion budget. And a lot of that, of course, is spread out over all the departments, and people talk about, okay, what's the one thing you should cut that would just, solve the budget? But actually, it's everything, across the board, if you just snipped a little from every department. And in fact, the governor has a mechanism for doing that. All he has to do is to increase the budget restrictions, and that tells the department heads, okay, I got to cut 5% or 10%, and the department heads are the best to know what should be cut from their department. So instead of, giving the scissors to any lawmaker or governor, you could just give the scissors to the department head and say, you cut. And in fact, the governor does this regularly every year. He just needs to do a little more of it. That's one way to cut. Another way to cut is with his veto pen, which we're going to see in the coming months if he takes that out. And he's done this regularly too. You do a line item veto, and you can cut any number you want. And so those are two very easy ways to cut. And that would just, if he just went back to the budget that was originally passed last year, or the budget that was originally proposed at the beginning of this year, that would already be a lot of cuts. So.
We always hear that the state needs, you alluded to it in the outset, but it's insane that we have a annual $10 billion budget for a population of 1.4 million. And then folks are going to do the math. We don't do it on this show, but they'll do the math and come up with what is the return on the investment that we're making. And then we go through a little bit of laundry list of expectations. We should have education that is absolutely above reproach. We should have I'm thinking, I got crime on my mind because when I talk with folks, that's so top of mind is crime.
Well, there's police and courts and fire and all kinds of things, of course. Yeah.
And yes, there are counties with responsibilities, but taking that infrastructure and so much more. What do you say to folks who are concerned about, hey, I'm paying this much, but I'm only getting this back? Ted, start with you.
I think that's you hit the nail on the head, right? Like that is one of the biggest things when I talk to people, and their biggest frustrations is it's not so much that they're paying so much in taxes, it's that what are those taxes going to? And, for the amount that we pay, we should have, like you said, world-class schools. We should have roads that are freshly paved. We should have, just simple things like cutting the grass. These are right. Basic things that our government should be able to take care of, especially when you have such a high budget. But all too often we hear, there's not enough money. And so I think, when you hear the frustration of people, and this especially comes up when we talk about the pay raises for elected officials that have been happening over the past few years, a lot of folks, quite frankly, don't feel that those are deserved because the government isn't working for them. And it isn't, as efficient as it could be. So I think that's where a lot of that frustration lies.
Oh, there's a lot of it, too. Believe me. We're talking Grassroots Institute of Hawaii at 7:24 with both Joe and Ted. I'll open up the phone lines if folks want to jump in at the bottom of the hour. I don't want to dwell too much longer, but everything does come down to CHC, cold hard cash. And the decision is going to be finalized by sine die, but will it really? Is there a chance that there's going to be some disruption that will call for, hold on, a special session? Goodness. Joe.
Well, there's always a chance, and there's always a chance that something could die, too. I mean, the governor has a veto pen where he can line item, but he can also veto wholesale as well. He can kill entire bills. And, what happens if they don't pass a state budget this year? Well, that would return to the previously passed budget. It's not a crisis. This is we just go back to the previous numbers. So anything could happen. And as you mentioned, special sessions could happen too. But that might be more difficult, though, in an election year, especially if they held a special session to increase taxes even more or spend more or something. So
I'm just curious, Ted, when you had the conversations regarding the budget specifically, what was the responses from lawmakers? Could you give us a sense of those you interacted with, their level of comprehension, understanding, and replies to the concerns that you have raised?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to take it at two different, we have the House and the Senate, and so there's two very different mindsets when it comes to that. A lot of times the Senate is kind of the more fiscally conservative, I have to be careful using that word in Hawaii, but it is true. And when push comes to shove, most of the folks in the Senate did not want to touch the tax cuts. They wanted to preserve those for folks, and they wanted to find ways to cut. The House is, the typical tax and spend Democrats that we see, all throughout the country. And so that was kind of the mindset. A lot of times when I talk to folks, again, the conversation became, well, we can't cut essential services. And again, these were not things that we were looking to do. Nobody was looking to take away SNAP or Medicare or Medicaid or anything like that. It's things like getting rid of vacant positions. And in fact, that bill, which you would think is not something super controversial, it is just automatically getting rid of vacant positions after 4 or 5 years that they've been vacant.
Right.
So nobody's losing their job or anything. But a lot of times when I would talk to people about this, they would say, well, think about the ramifications down the line. And, this is, again, a position that's been unfilled for 4 or 5 years. I don't know that there are necessarily any ramifications. What's happening is those departments are using that money as a slush fund. So, it's just a matter of making sure that we have efficiency in that government and that, our elected officials are doing the right thing. I do want to appreciate both chairs of the House and the Senate because they were both very open to this. I don't think either one necessarily had their heels dug in and were not moving. So I think it's important to note that at least they were willing to kind of negotiate and compromise and try to find areas to cut.
Oh, my goodness. Joe Kent?
Yeah, I mean, it's not like lawmakers haven't heard of these ideas before. In fact, we've been telling them for years. They're sick of us talking to them. But they actually did consider there was a bill for vacant positions, to cut them. And there was a bill to take special funds and use those into the general fund. And in fact, that one did pass, I believe.
Yep.
That was around $45 million there. And so, what we need to see, though, and what lawmakers are especially afraid of, is not the Grassroots Institute. They're afraid of the voters, even though it might not seem so. Like it might seem like a lock, but lawmakers are politicians too, and we're in an election year. So, if you have strong feelings about what happened this year, definitely make your elected official know.
That's an interesting point, and one that is, in theory, absolutely true, the accountability to the voters. But we all know, and not to be repetitive, that's a challenging position for us. In just a few minutes remaining, transitioning away, voter integrity was one of the top-of-mind issues on this program. And the Election Commission and the legal intervention from the mainland, and of course, with our elections much, how shall I say, popular in conversation when we talk about elections. Where's voter integrity this session?
Well, it definitely feels compromised with all of these, investigations going on into where did the votes go, where did they come from? You've got missing votes, thousands of them. And so that's an interesting point you raise. In this upcoming election, are voters going to feel like their vote matters, really? Now, it hasn't been definitively, found either that there's been, is it stupidity or is it evil? I don't know what's going on here, but anyways, I think the mood in the air is like, does my vote even matter? Does this even count? But I can tell you, talking to politicians myself, is at least they're kind of neurotic about what their voters think about them. Every single voter that talks to them about an issue or emails them, they have pretty thin skin about this thing, which is a good thing, actually, because that means that your vote actually does matter more than you think it does, I think, and actually your opinion matters even more.
It emerged out of Elections Commission, that a proposal to return back to precincts and ballots and doing away with mail-in except for a very small, as we did before. Ted, when you conversed at the Big Square building, what was your reactions of lawmakers to this idea?
I quite frankly, I don't know that they're going to necessarily go for it. I think a lot of them, like the current system. even though it may not be working. There really hasn't been a ton of openness necessarily to change that. So it is definitely frustrating. But I think Joe kind of hit on it when it came to the pressures of an election year. But I think it's really important that people continue to stay involved, because it's one thing to vote in November, and I get it. It's hard, to stay in touch with all of these things, and there's a lot that's happening in the legalese that's going on behind the scenes. But continuing to keep up that pressure, because all these things that we talked about, so far, and all the tax bills that we've talked about so far, those come up every year. And this isn't just a one-off thing. So continuing to stay engaged is really important to keep that pressure on lawmakers, because if they just think, well, every election year I can't pass a tax increase, but every other year, well, hey, everything's on the table.
Right.
So it's just critically important that everybody is kind of pushing them along and keeping them accountable.
Joe, all the information we need to connect with you.
grassrootinstitute.org. You can join 30,000 other people who receive our email newsletter every week at grassrootinstitute.org.
We're 7:32 and continuing with Joe Kett, Ted Kefalas, and Grassroot Institute. If you'd like to join us, phone lines 521-8383. It's all about the Grassroot mission. Grassroot Institute are with us during this hour on this Aloha Monday morning, both with Joe and with Ted. Before we get back into the actual session and productivity, or lack thereof, some sidebar issues, and that, of course, with Sylvia Luke. And what has transpired from the original to where we are now. Her leave of absence approved by the governor. Love to get your take. Joe, start with you.
Well, whenever you have a politician who is viewed as uncorruptible, it always happens that something funny happens. Now, we don't know exactly what happened with Sylvia Luke. The jury's still out. They're still doing an investigation. Was it really her that accepted the monies and so on? But in any case, for politics, which is important right now because it's an election year, Sylvia Luke being in that position certainly doesn't help the governor. And so, it totally makes sense what he's doing. On the other hand, it's a little funny how it's being done. She's still the lieutenant governor, and now there's an acting governor in her place. So I guess there's some precedent-setting things happening here with what happens if you have a major investigation going on into the lieutenant governor. What happens if there's an acting governor who really has the power here? And, the acting governor, Keith Regan, he is the comptroller, the state comptroller. So there's all kinds of questions there. Who's in charge and so on. So,
yeah, and part of it, too, is that holding the person, auditing, etc. And that's kind of there's a thing, for instance, with Hart and the state that was recently announced that his department has opined about. Your thoughts, Ted?
Yeah, I think it's hard, right? Anytime that this happens with an elected official, you lose trust. And again, I want to be fair to Lieutenant Governor Sylvia Luke because, she hasn't been found guilty of anything yet. And so, that's important. You're innocent until proven guilty. True. But in the world of politics, it's all about public perception. And so if the public thinks that you did this, you're pretty much dead in the water. And so I was a little bit, quite honestly, surprised that she had started her campaign back up, originally, and had gotten endorsements from HGEA and a host of others, only to then shut it down. But I think Joe brought up a good point with some of the question marks and the acting lieutenant governor now, Keith Regan. And, let's say something were to, God forbid something happened to Governor Green. Who would then take over? Would this be, Keith Regan that would step into that governor role, or would it be Sylvia Luke that would come back from the dead and take that over? So I think there's a lot of questions there, and hopefully we don't have to find out the answers, but I think that there's just a lot of unknowns still.
I would think, just as a layperson, there would be rules of succession that would be adhere to, and that. But it was interesting. Went all the way down the line until Mr. Regan said, "Oh, I'll do it." It was like fifth choice. And
Yeah, nobody wants to be the lieutenant governor.
LG. I mean, let's go to our phones, 521-8383, and we head out to Steve out Kaneohe side. Steve, good morning to you.
Good morning to all of you. I've got a couple of questions. We were voting by mail, and I guess now they're saying that we're not going to vote by mail. Is that true?
Well, as far as I know, that we still are on that tack. There was a recommendation in the Elections Commission, but they're only advancing. They don't have legal authority. It'd have to go through the state legislature. I think you mentioned they haven't made a commitment, and maybe the actual bill just didn't go forward.
Yeah, I don't think that there's any movement on getting rid of the mail-in ballots this year.
Steve?
Okay, because I have moved, and I don't know what to do to get. I have a P.O. box, but I moved somewhere, and I don't know if they will send me that to a P.O. box.
That's a good question. That's a county clerk question.
Mm-hmm.
But
County clerk, I would call.
yes. That's for Oahu, yes.
Okay, and my last thing is I was talking on the Aloha Freedom Commission, and I said, this is news I think I got from you a long time ago, Rick. Mm-hmm. We don't have a recall petition, yet we have all these politicians here that want to impeach Donald Trump and everybody else. If they can't be recalled, where do they figure they get to recall other people? And that ends my questions, and thank you very much.
Well, we appreciate you for the calls and the points.
Yeah, that's a good point. It would be ironic if that were true. I'm assuming it is true. I haven't looked into it, but yeah, actually, I remember there was a recall petition. I remember in Maui County for the mayor there during the COVID years, if I remember, with Mayor Victorino. Mm-hmm. Now, that recall petition, was a few, hundred or a few thousand, but it needed to be significantly more, by an order of magnitude, I believe. So, and that was a pretty strong petition. So I think even if it were very easy to do here, it would still take the will goes back to the will of the people and the will of the voters. So
it is already 7:44 here on the Rickamata program. Ancillary topic: the appointment of a new Hawaii Supreme Court justice.
That's right.
Chief Justice.
Is it Mr. Devins, I believe, right?
Flat.
And there was a lot of hubbub over his relations and serving as part of the union. And I think it was the problem was it wasn't disclosed where it should have been, so say a lot of people. And yeah, that is a good point. By the way, this deserves more transparency. It deserves ultimate transparency if we're going to have, Supreme Court justice involved in this. And it also is just disappointing to see that, a union another union aligned official is in charge of things, when actually, if you look at, like I said, the budget, if you look at the budget and go through it line by line, so many things are there that could be so much cheaper if it wasn't for a lot of these union laws that keep things in place. Mm-hmm. For example, could things be done easier by a private sector worker instead of a public worker? In many cases, yes. In fact, the counties are screaming, yes, give us the flexibility to reduce our budgets in this way by using private sector workers. But there's a law in place right now that prevents that from happening. You have to use a public sector worker instead. And, that law presumably would be held in place by any Supreme Court justice. Right. So, yeah.
It's amazing because I'm hearkening back to the 1980s. Or is it the 1880s? I'm not sure how old. But the city of Indianapolis, under, I believe, Mayor Goldman, did exactly that. Extricated union contracts from city services. And one of the primary areas was transportation. And the quality of service and the cost of operations went down dramatically, demonstrating exactly what you had said.
Oh, yes. Yeah. And most of it is in the fringe benefits, by the way. If you compare salary to salary, it might be similar, or actually you might have to pay more in the private sector. But once you start comparing the public pension unfunded liabilities, then it really skews the other way, and you actually do see a huge savings. And, that's a big factor right now. We're seeing, engineering, a huge shortage of engineers in county government right now, and the counties all say we can't hire the good enough engineers because we can't raise the salaries. Well, what if you could have that flexibility to do that? Except for this law, that would be possible. Now, some people say, well, then it would cost more, but I beg to differ. It actually might come out in the wash, and then you'd get more engineers, and that might help hasten all these permits that are stuck in the department.
Your thoughts, Ted, the rise of Mr. Devens?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely concerning, and I think obviously, when you have somebody that's looking for a Chief Justice role, that deserves more scrutiny. But I think the more concerning thing to me was that this is now just coming to light, and Mr. Devens was already an Associate Justice. So,
Correct.
How is this now just coming out? And I think to Joe's point, too, just about union control, it's something that really drives up the cost, but it's not just the cost, it's also a lot of times the quality. And so sometimes when you look at things like the permitting department in Honolulu, or name the island, you have crazy wait times, but they're not allowed to go out and get third-party reviewers a lot of times. In fact, the time that they were allowed to do it, Maui County, with the Lahaina rebuild, hired a company called Four Leaf to
Right.
do all of these things and look through the permits, and they were getting them done, 2-3 times, 4 times faster than the county government. And so, it's okay to sometimes contract these things out and find experts in their field to be able to do this work. We don't always have to do it in-house. And so I think, that's something that as we look in future years, we need to try to, implement more of throughout government.
I mean, the institution of prevailing wage is an example of just how challenging it can be. We're at 7:49 in the morning, together with Joe and Ted of Grassroot Institute. Invaluable conversation continues after this.
The Starkey's Auto
Down numerous things, but I think at this point it's going to be more of a kind of a wide-eyed view. At the beginning of the session and through the program, there are particular topics that resonate. If you don't mind, speed round a little bit.
Okay.
Take these issues. We've touched upon it, but legislatively speaking, corruption. Joe?
Well, there have been a slew of corrupt cases at the legislature, and it seems to be still going through like a bowling ball. I mean, it seemed like this all it started with the mailbox, and the the police chief and his wife and the Kealohas. But this, went to Hart and the rail, and then it went to a few Milton Choi, and then we had some lawmakers at the legislature who got busted. And then I think some of them started squawking, and now that led to Sylvia Luke and the Public Utilities Commission, Leo Asuncion, and who else? Who's next is the question. So it looks like the drama isn't over. I've still got my popcorn.
Here we go. Ted, as far as were there proposed legislative bills to address specifically corruption, and if so, what happened?
I think there were a couple, but as they typically go, they died along the way. I know there was also one to look more into this brown paper bag of $35,000, and that died as well. And I think, when it comes to corruption, there's so much when it comes to a loss of trust from folks. And it's really disappointing to see when you have elected officials, but then also 8 different agencies, that it may not be quote unquote corruption, but you and I, if something walks like a duck, talks like a duck,
There you go.
it's a duck.
It is. It's also a few moments. Kurt out in New Valley joining us. Kurt, thank you for the call. Good morning.
Hey, good morning. My question is, whatever happened to the discussion on the unfunded liability of the state's pension plans? What's the number now that left unfunded?
Well, yeah, it's about $24 billion, I believe, at the employee retirement system and the EUTF, that's the Employer Union Trust Fund. But then if you add in, now for that, the unfunded liabilities have been going down in recent years, except for the stock market. Because remember, all of the pension funds are invested in the stock market. And if the stocks don't do well, or at least their investments do well, then the unfunded liability goes up. And I believe that's what happened last year. The numbers came out and showed that. And if the numbers go up too high, then they have to knock down their assumption of how much they're going to get. They think they're going to get, 7.5% or 7%. But if they keep undershooting that investment, then they have to ratchet down the assumption, and that significantly could increase the unfunded liabilities. If they have to go down to 6.5% as their assumed rate of return of investments, then that could dramatically, we might see unfunded liabilities of $30 billion and so on. So this is still a live issue.
Kurt, helpful?
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Thank you for the explanation. I'm just going to, final question. So many COL, cost of living. The lamentations are still underway. Our rankings in the country still some of the highest, if not the highest, per capita. I'll start with Ted. Cost of living. Was it addressed this session? If so, how?
Yeah, I don't necessarily think it was. It's hard to have like a silver bullet to address cost of living. But I do think, we were successful, like I said, in getting rid of all of these tax hike proposals, preserving at least a good chunk of the income tax cuts. So at least people's cost of living isn't going to go up. But I do think it's something that is just a constant conversation here in Hawaii. I am glad that there were a few housing bills that were passed that will help when it comes to the cost of housing. But again, not enough was done there. So some of the bigger, kind of more wholesale proposals that actually would have made a drastic difference in prices, unfortunately, those were killed throughout the session, and we'll be back at it again next year.
Understand. Ted, final thoughts, and then I'll turn it over to Joe.
Yeah, I think, we talked about how important it is to hold our legislators accountable, and I think this year was a perfect example. Joe mentioned it at the beginning of our conversation, but this year was mainly defense for us. And so you're not always going to be able to play offense. Sometimes you have to kill some of the bad ideas that come across. And so I do think, oftentimes we can be the lone voice in the room when it comes to fighting these things. And it's really incredibly helpful when we have people and regular constituents and just regular everyday folks that are there as well, writing in and taking their time to let legislators know, that these are bad ideas.
Ted, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Rick.
Thank you. Joe, final thoughts? Less than a minute.
Well, if you want to help us at the legislature, you can do so by getting on our email list at grassrootinstitute.org, where we will alert you if there's something that we need your help on. And that's really how we get things done. It's not just our voice, it's your voice. So grassrootinstitute.org. And we've got events coming up September 4th, our gala with Adam Carolla down in Waikiki. September 4th. You can get more info at grassrootinstitute.org.
Yeah, I can't wait to MC that.
That's a good idea.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for not only today, but what you do each day. Thank you.
Thank you.